So, recently I went down a weird internet rabbit hole around weird college football rivalries. For example, I found that LSU and Tulane used to play each other every year. It was called the Battle of the Rag, and it was one of the toughest rivalries in sports there. And I'm talking way back. I'm talking in the 30s, 20s, 1910s, and it disappeared when Tulane left the SEC. And they tried to reignite the rivalry in 2005 and 2006, but as you can imagine, it just wasn't as competitive. LSU just gained so much of the edge. And that led me to wonder. In recent memory, we've seen the death of college football rivalries. I mean, the Backyard Bowl with Pitt and West Virginia, one of the best rivalries in college football, it just ended. And one of the more infamous ones is the ending of Texas A&M versus Texas. Those two teams hated each other. They hated each other. And they don't play anymore. But what about the birth of a new college football rivalry? Now, in the past 10 years, we've seen teams play each other and show a next level amount of competition, respect, and hatred of one another. And I've come a list of 4 pairings of teams who I think should be new college football rivalries. If these teams played each other each and every year, it would equal must-see TV. It would be interesting. You would love to see it. And before I get into the list, I'm going to go ahead and give you some asterisks to keep in mind. Mainly, no cross-conference teams. No in-conference teams, sorry. Florida and Auburn, as an example, where even though they're in the same conference and they may not play each other each and every year and they're not necessarily rivals, I'm still not going to put them on the list only because they're both in the SEC. And another one for those not in the SEC world is Kansas versus Texas, where they may not play each other each and every year, but I'm still not going to put them as rivals. And then another asterisk is no discontinued rivalries like Pitt versus West Virginia, because they should play each other. And sometimes, even though they should play each other each and every year, there's just not room enough in everybody's schedule. And with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and go with the first one on my list, Clemson and Alabama. Even despite their last meeting being very lackluster, it was the biggest blowout in the Nick Saban era at Alabama. It was a huge, huge disappointment. But because the last matchup was labeled as a disappointment, it shows the expectation that the mass public has when these two teams play each other. There's such high expectations, and that shows how great these two teams are. Now, there are 3 obvious reasons that these two teams need to play each other each and every year. Number 1, competitiveness. Think about last year. In the Duke's Mayo Bowl, at the beginning of the season, Georgia played Clemson. The game ended 10-3 and was labeled as the most boring game of the year. A great defensive game if you love defenses, but the mass media and the mass public didn't really watch it because they saw it as boring. I personally loved it, but imagine for a second that it was Alabama versus Clemson. First off, the game wouldn't have ended 10-3. So go ahead and get that out of your mind. It would have been a high offensive game. There would have been some great defensive moments, but it would have been a high defensive and offensive game, and it would have been exciting. It wouldn't have been boring. Everybody would have loved to see Alabama play Clemson. It would have put butts in seats, and everybody and their mamas would have been talking about the game after it happened. And then my number 2 reason is geography. It makes sense. They're both in the South. They're both in the Southeast. It's only a 6-hour car ride from Tuscaloosa over to Clemson. Clemson's campus. It's ACC versus the SEC, and when you think about it, they're battling for recruits, so why not have them battle on the football field? And then my last reason, which I think makes sense, you could also say it doesn't, what are you talking about, is Dabo Swinney. Now, why do I have this as a reason? He's going to be at Clemson for a long, long time. 2 years ago, he signed a 12-year deal, so he still has 10 years left at Clemson. So he's going to be there for a long time. And if you remember, he played at Alabama. He's from he's from Alabama, and this shows this shows a feud between the two schools already. They're already playing each other. Imagine how Dabo Swinney feels. I go to a restaurant in Birmingham pretty often, where I'm from, and Dabo Swinney, his picture's framed up, and he signed it Roll Tigers. So he's from the area. He goes to the area all the time. So it's obvious that these two teams should play each other each and every year. I'm going to move on to my number 2 team, because I went on for them way too long. It's Coastal Carolina and BYU. What? What are you thinking? What are you thinking? These are the 2 COVID year Mickey Mouse teams? Yes, I'm thinking about these 2 teams. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up the clip, Zach Wilson versus Coastal Carolina. There's a video of Zach Wilson getting thrown down after the play, and then 2 Coastal Carolina players just blocking him into the ground, pancaking him. Every time he stands up, they push him down on the ground. And this shows the hatred these 2 teams have for each other. Both of these teams, they're physical, and they had the best game during the 2020 year. And on top of that, these 2 schools, they're kind of party schools. They kind of have a similar vibe, although they're under way different foundings and a way different, I guess you can say, aura around them. And the perfect thing that summarizes this rivalry is, if you looked in the student section of both BYU and Coastal Carolina, they were wearing shirts that said Mullets versus Mormons. That's perfect. On one side, you have a traditional in asterisks because they are a party school. And on the other side, you have Mullet Town, USA. I mean, that's fantastic. That summarizes what college sports are all about. And if these teams play each and every year, it allows for a platform for both teams. Now, what do I mean by this? Coastal Carolina will get to play BYU, who's from the Big 12. It allows for them to play a Big 12 team each and every year. And for BYU, on paper, they should beat Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina, that should be an easy breeze-through game for them, right? Well, last time they met, their best year in program history, some of them called it, aside from their national championship victory with Jim McMahon, Coastal Carolina beat BYU. So clearly anything can happen between these 2 playing, and they just have such great fireworks on and off the field. And I would love to see them play. And now I'm going to move on to these next 2 rivalries. Well, rivalries and asterisks, but now there's another asterisk you want to keep in mind. These 2 teams technically are rivals, but not on the football field. On hardwood, on basketball, in basketball. But they should be rivals in football. Now, we're going to start off with Cincinnati and Ohio State. They're both in Ohio, and these teams should play for obvious reasons. These teams should play each and every year. Their last meeting was in 2019, and I'll get to what happened in 2019 in a second. But there are obvious reasons. It's Columbus and Cincinnati. It's an in-state rivalry. There's a recruitment battle going on. They're both competing over the same recruits. It's a TV exposure battle. You might go to one bar on one side of the street, and it's playing a Cincinnati game, then you go to across the street and it's playing an Ohio State game. There's just a rivalry inside the state of Ohio, and most importantly, it's Big 12 versus Big 10 football. We're seeing right now the Big 10 has one up on the Big 12, but what if Cincinnati goes into Columbus and gets a victory? It's a huge win for the Big 12. It's one conference versus another, and that's perfect. This right here is by far the perfect rivalry I've named so far. And lo and behold, listen to the name of the rivalry. Bearcats and the Buckeyes. That even sounds great, right? It just sounds like must-watch TV. I'm going to say it again. Bearcats and the Buckeyes. Doesn't that just sound perfect? Now, last time these two teams played was in 2019, and they've been on and off where they would play one game every 5 or 6 years. So I wouldn't classify it as a rivalry on the football field. But either way, in 2019, Cincinnati lost 42-0. They should be ready. Cincinnati, they should be ready. They should be ready to prove themselves, and both teams are at an all-time high. Cincinnati coming off a college football playoff visit, and Ohio State coming off of just winning the Rose Bowl and projected college football champions this next year. A lot of people betting favorites, I believe. Both teams are at an all-time high, and they should play each other. They should play each other to prove who is the better team in Ohio. And now I'm going to move on to the last pair, and that's UConn and UMass. I know, strap in. They've played the past 2 years, but over the course of 76 years, they've played each other, well, not 76 years, they've played each other 76 times. Over the course of those 76 times, it's been on and off. They've played each other since 1888, on and off. And why? Why has it been so non-consecutive? These teams should play every year. And I know what you're thinking. What? This is a basketball rivalry. Why should they play on the football field every year? I know, it's a little comical, but these are the two worst teams in college football. For the past 2 years, they were rated the worst two teams in college football. People called it the toilet bowl when they've played the past 2 years. And that's fun. That's fun football. These two teams get to prove to each other that they're not the worst. They get to play each other on the football field to prove they're not the worst. And needless to say, these two programs, they don't put a lot of effort into their football programs. These two schools, they don't put any effort in their college football programs. And they get to show why, to their schools, they need to put effort into their college football programs, because what if they lose and now they're the worst program? That's embarrassing to those schools. So this is a platform for them to show why they should get more funding and be a better football program. Now, the last time they played was in November. They played this past year, and UMass beat UConn. And get ready for this. Both teams were 0-9, and UMass stormed the field. But, hold up. There's a little correction. UMass, although they stormed the field, they only had 50 fans in the stadium. So only 50 students stormed the field for the victory UMass had. That's perfect. That is a picturesque moment. And as I'm beginning to wrap up this video, this is the perfect way to end, this recording, this is the perfect way to end it. Rivalries, they bring out the better parts of sports, and they bring out the better parts of people. And rivalries like these, they would make college football way more competitive and way more entertaining, and that's the most important part. They would bring out the better parts of people and the better parts of communities. And that's what I got to say about this. Thank you for listening.